The majestic halls of medieval castles hide an architectural mystery that has baffled researchers for centuries. Imagine a fireplace the size of a modern apartment, 7 meters wide, 3 meters deep, and nearly 2 meters high. Its firebox could easily accommodate a horse-drawn carriage. Why did the rational builders of the past create such gigantic hearths in rooms with low ceilings? Was it really just to show off their wealth? Or did these colossal structures have functions that we cannot even imagine? Today, we will reveal the secrets of medieval fireplaces and learn how they shaped the lives of entire generations of European nobility. If you are interested in learning about the mysteries of medieval architecture, subscribe to our channel. There are many more amazing historical mysteries ahead. What do you think? Were giant fireplaces a justified necessity or a wasteful luxury of the medieval nobility? Share your opinion in the comments. When modern people first enter the great halls of medieval castles, they are struck not only by the grandeur of the stone walls or the height of the arches. The most striking impression is made by the giant fireplaces, whose size seems absurd for rooms with relatively low ceilings. Imagine a fireplace opening 4 to 5 meters wide and up to 3 meters deep. A real stone cave in the middle of the hall. At Warwick Castle in England, the fireplace in the Great Hall is 7 meters wide. Its firebox is so spacious that it can easily accommodate a small carriage. Similar designs can be found at Conwy Castle in Wales, where the fireplace opening takes up almost a quarter of the hall's wall. The French castles of the Loire Valley offer even more impressive examples. At Chambord Castle, the fireplace in the throne room exceeds the size of a modern studio apartment. These architectural giants seem like an unjustified luxury. After all, a standard-sized fireplace is quite sufficient for heating a room 4 to 5 meters high. Moreover, giant fireboxes create a powerful draft that sucks warm air out of the room faster than it can heat it. This creates a paradox. The larger the fireplace, the colder the room. But medieval architects were not fools. Every stone in the castle had its purpose. Every structure served a specific function. This means that giant fireplaces were not built by accident. Their impressive size concealed functions that are not always obvious to modern people. To solve this architectural mystery, we need to immerse ourselves in the world of a medieval castle. We need to understand how its inhabitants lived, what tasks they performed, and what challenges they faced. Only then will it become clear why the rational and practical builders of that time created such large-scale heating structures. Let's start our investigation with the basics. Understanding what a castle was for medieval society and what role fire played in its life. The architectural mystery of giant fireplaces has intrigued researchers for more than a century. The first mentions of this phenomenon are found in the records of 18th-century travelers who described the hearth rooms of European castles with surprise. In the 19th century, French architect Eugène Viollet-le-Duc devoted an entire chapter of his famous Explanatory Dictionary of French Architecture to this topic. The first hypothesis was the most obvious. Fireplaces were built large for better heating. However, experiments in the early 20th century proved this theory to be untenable. British researcher Sir Charles Oman took temperature measurements in the halls of Rochester Castle in the winter of 1907. The results were unexpected. With a giant fireplace in operation, the temperature in the center of the hall was only 2 to 3 degrees higher than without it. Moreover, archaeological research has shown that in many castles, Giant fireplaces were located next to small heating hearths hidden in the walls. These modest stoves provided much more heat at a lower fuel cost. It turns out that the owners of the castles knew perfectly well how to heat the rooms efficiently, but deliberately built inefficient giant fireplaces. The second hypothesis linked the size of the fireplaces to a demonstration of wealth. Indeed, maintaining a huge firebox required a colossal amount of firewood. Some 14th century documents contain records of fuel costs for castle fireplaces. For example, the Earl of Lancaster spent more on firewood for a single fireplace than on the salaries of a dozen servants. However, this theory also had its weaknesses. The medieval nobility demonstrated their wealth in many other ways, with expensive fabrics, gold tableware, and exotic delicacies. Why spend huge sums on inefficient heating, especially since guests only saw the fireplace for a few hours, while the fuel burned around the clock? The third hypothesis suggested that fireplaces had a defensive purpose. A powerful draft could quickly remove smoke from torches and braziers in the event of a siege. But an analysis of the layouts showed that the fireplaces were located not in the defensive areas, but in the ceremonial rooms of the castles. Modern researchers have put forward a comprehensive theory that combines all the previous hypotheses. In their opinion, the giant fireplaces served several functions at once, each of which was vital for a medieval castle. To understand the true purpose of giant fireplaces, one must set aside modern ideas about heating and immerse oneself in the realities of medieval life. A 12th to 13th century castle was not just a feudal lord's residence, it was a complex organism where each element of architecture served multiple purposes simultaneously. The main hall of the castle, where the giant fireplace was located, served as a throne room, dining room, courtroom, reception area for guests, and even a bedroom for servants. This room was used for feasts, political alliances, court proceedings, and receiving vassals. The fireplace was not just a source of heat, it was the central element of the entire social life of the castle. The first and most obvious function of giant fireplaces is culinary. In the era before the invention of separate kitchens, all food was prepared in the fireplaces of the main hall. The size of the firebox allowed whole oxen to be roasted on spits, soups to be cooked in huge cauldrons, and bread to be baked in special niches. During large feasts, dozens of dishes could be prepared simultaneously in a single fireplace. Archaeological finds confirm the culinary purpose of fireplaces. Special hooks for hanging cauldrons, remains of rotating mechanisms for spits, and recesses for installing bread ovens have been found in the fireboxes of castles. At Goodrich Castle in England, a fireplace with 7 different cooking devices was discovered. The second function was no less important: social. The fire in the fireplace served as a natural center of attraction for all the inhabitants of the castle. They gathered around it to discuss business, tell stories, play games, and entertain themselves. The size of the fireplace allowed a large company to gather. Up to 50 people could warm themselves by the fire at the same time. Interestingly, the layout of many castles is built around the main fireplace. Seating was arranged in a semicircle, and tables were set up so that all participants in the feast could see the fire. Even the lord's throne was often placed with its back to the fireplace, not only for warmth, but also to create an impressive silhouette against the backdrop of the flames. The third function was symbolic. In medieval culture, fire had a deep religious and mystical meaning. The hearth was considered a sacred place, under whose protection the whole family was. The bigger the fire, the stronger the protection was considered to be. A giant fireplace symbolized the power of the family and its ability to protect everyone under the castle's roof. The construction of a giant fireplace was an engineering feat of medieval craftsmen. Creating a structure capable of safely controlling huge amounts of fire and smoke required a deep knowledge of physics, mathematics, and construction. Each element of such a fireplace was calculated with precision. The basis of the structure was a powerful foundation that went down to a depth of 4 meters. The foundation was laid out of specially selected stones, sandstone or limestone, capable of withstanding constant temperature loads. Archaeological research shows that under some fireplaces, there were entire underground chambers that served for additional ventilation and fuel storage. The walls of the firebox were built from refractory materials. In Northern Europe, special refractory clay mixed with crushed brick was used. In southern regions, volcanic tuff or basalt was preferred. The walls were up to 1 meter thick, which was necessary not only for fire resistance, but also for heat accumulation. The most complex element was the smoke removal system. A giant fireplace required a chimney with a diameter of at least 2 meters, but simply increasing the size led to uncontrolled draft, which could extinguish the fire or, conversely, fan it to dangerous proportions. Medieval craftsmen solved this problem ingeniously. They created multi-channel chimneys with a complex system of dampers. Inside the chimney were special expansion chambers where the smoke cooled and slowed down. This allowed the draft to be controlled and prevented backdrafts in strong winds. In some castles, chimneys had up to 5 such chambers located at different levels. Special attention was paid to fire safety. Special stone slabs capable of withstanding falling, burning logs were laid around the fireplace at a distance of 3 to 4 meters. Wooden floor beams were treated with special clay and lime-based compounds that made them less combustible. The construction of one large fireplace took from 6 months to 2 years and required the participation of various specialists. Bricklayers laid out the main structure. Stove builders were engaged in refractory cladding. Blacksmiths made metal elements, grates, dampers, fasteners for boilers and rotisseries. The cost of such construction was enormous. According to 13th century documents, a fireplace for a castle cost the equivalent of the annual income of a small estate. This once again confirms that giant fireplaces were not built simply for beauty or prestige. They solved vital problems of medieval life. In medieval society, fire had a special social status. The right to light a large fire was a privilege of the nobility, a symbol of power and might. The higher a person's social status, the larger the fire they could afford. A giant fireplace in a castle was not just a heating device. It was a declaration of the owner's place in the feudal hierarchy. Historians have numerous examples of how strictly the use of fire was regulated in medieval Europe. 12th century English documents contain fire regulations that specify in detail who was allowed to have what kind of fire. Commoners were only allowed to light small fires for cooking. Craftsmen could have stoves for work, but only of a certain size. Only noblemen had the right to large fireplaces. This system had not only social, but also practical significance. In an era when most buildings were made of wood, the uncontrolled use of fire could lead to catastrophic fires. Large cities regularly burned to the ground precisely because of careless handling of fire. Therefore, the right to have a large fire was given only to those who could ensure safety, the owners of stone castles with professional servants. The Church also supported this system, giving fire religious significance. In Christian symbolism, Fire was associated with divine light, purification, and protection from evil. A large fireplace in the castle hall was often consecrated with a special ceremony, after which it was considered a sacred place. Extinguishing such a fire without extreme necessity was considered a sin. Guests of the castle always paid attention to the size of the fireplace. It was the first sign by which they assessed the wealth and status of the owner. Medieval chronicles contain descriptions of fireplaces as an important part of diplomatic protocol. Ambassadors reported to their sovereigns not only on the results of negotiations, but also on the size of the fire burning in the reception hall. The social role of fire was particularly evident during holidays and ceremonies. At Christmas, Easter, and other important dates, especially large fires were lit in castle fireplaces, visible from afar. This was a way to demonstrate the prosperity and power of the feudal house to the entire neighborhood. Interestingly, in some regions of Europe, there was a custom of fire inheritance. When the owner of the castle died, the fire in the main fireplace was solemnly extinguished, and the new heir had to rekindle it, symbolically taking power over the lands and people. If there was no heir or his rights were disputed, the fireplace remained cold until the dispute was resolved. Thus, the size of the fireplace served as a visual code that was understandable to all strata of medieval society. A single glance at the fire allowed one to determine the social status of the owner of the house, his wealth, political influence, and even religious righteousness. The culinary function of giant fireplaces was perhaps the most important and practical. In an era when separate kitchens were a luxury available only to the wealthiest castles, the main hall with its huge fireplace served as the only place for cooking for all the inhabitants of the castle. The size of the firebox allowed food to be prepared for hundreds of people at once. Medieval feasts amaze contemporaries with their scale. At the wedding of English King Edward I in 1285, 400 oxen, 6,000 pigs, 7,000 chickens, and a huge amount of game were served. All this food was cooked in the giant fireplaces of the castle halls. An ordinary fireplace simply could not cope with such volumes. The technology of cooking in large fireplaces was a complex art. Different dishes required different temperatures and methods of preparation. In one firebox, meat could be roasted on spits, soups could be cooked in suspended cauldrons, bread could be baked in side niches, and fish could be smoked in smoke chambers. Archaeological studies of fireplaces have revealed a complex system of hooks, chains, and lifting mechanisms that allowed the height of the pots above the fire to be adjusted. This made it possible to precisely control the cooking temperature. At Caerphilly Castle in Wales, a fireplace with 12 different levels for hanging pots was discovered. A special place in fireplace cooking was occupied by the preparation of meat on spits. For large carcasses, mechanical spits were used, driven by a system of gears or even specially trained dogs in treadmills. Even roasting of a whole bull required continuous rotation of the spit for 8 to 10 hours. Bread was baked in special niches built into the side walls of the fireplace. These niches were heated with hot coals. Then the coals were removed, and the dough was placed inside. The residual heat of the stone ensured even baking. Large fireplaces could have up to 6 such bread ovens, operating at different temperatures. Huge cauldrons were used to cook soups and stews, some of which could hold up to 500 liters of liquid. These cauldrons were suspended on strong chains and could be raised or lowered depending on the required intensity of boiling. Experienced cooks could cook up to 10 different soups in one fireplace at the same time. Fish and meat were smoked in the upper part of the chimney, where the temperature was lower and the smoke was thicker. Special grates allowed the products to be hung in the smoke stream for several days. In this way, supplies were prepared for the winter or in case of a siege of the castle. Managing such a culinary complex required high qualifications. The castle's head chef was no less important than the military commander or treasurer. He had to coordinate the work of dozens of assistants, accurately calculate the cooking time for various dishes, and ensure safety when working with huge amounts of fire. The giant fireplace served not only as a kitchen, but also as the main center of social life in a medieval castle. All members of the castle community, from the lord to the simple servants, gathered around the fire. It was a place where political decisions were made, alliances were formed, news was shared, and public opinion was shaped. The layout of the medieval hall was subordinated to the fireplace. The place of the lord of the castle was always located so that his back was turned to the fire. This not only provided warmth, but also created an impressive silhouette against the backdrop of the flames. Guests sat in a semicircle, with proximity to the fire determined by social status. The most honorable places were closest to the fireplace. Evening gatherings by the fireplace were an essential part of castle life. After dinner, the lord's entire family, his entourage, knights, and even servants gathered in the hall. Here, the day's affairs were discussed, tomorrow's work was planned, and controversial issues were resolved. The fire created a special atmosphere of trust and closeness, encouraging open communication. Fireplaces played a special role during the winter months, when the castle was practically cut off from the outside world. Long evenings were spent telling stories, singing songs, and playing games. Wandering minstrels and storytellers specifically chose places near the fireplace for their performances. The play of light and shadows from the flames enhanced the dramatic effect of their stories. The fireplace also served as a place for important announcements and ceremonies. Here, royal decrees were announced, letters from allies were read, and oaths of allegiance were taken from vassals. The solemnity of the moment was emphasized by the majestic fire, which seemed to bless the proceedings. Some chronicles contain descriptions of how important documents were symbolically passed through the fire to give them special power. The women of the castle also made active use of the fireplace area. Here, they held needlework gatherings where the ladies embroidered, spun, and discussed the news. Mothers told their children fairy tales and legends, passing on family history by the ancestral fire. Young girls learned the wisdom of housekeeping from older women. The fireplace played an important role in the upbringing of children from noble families. Little knights and ladies spent their evenings listening to stories about the exploits of their ancestors, studying heraldry, and the genealogy of their family. The fire in the fireplace was considered a witness to these lessons, a guardian of family traditions and values. Even business negotiations were often held by the fireplace. It was believed that fire promoted honesty and prevented lying. Merchants and craftsmen who came to the castle on business were often granted an audience by the fireplace. This was a sign of special trust and respect on the part of the host. Thus, the giant fireplace transformed the cold stone hall into a lively center of human communication. Its size allowed a large number of people to gather around the fire, creating a sense of a united family or community under the protection of the lord of the castle. The defensive functions of giant fireplaces are often underestimated by modern researchers, but for medieval castles, it was a matter of life and death. The massive fireplace system served not only as a source of heat and light, but also as an important element of military strategy, especially during long sieges. First, the fireplaces ensured the smooth operation of the forges even during a siege. Under blockade conditions, the ability to repair weapons and manufacture arrows and bolts for crossbows was critical. Ordinary forges could be damaged by enemy projectiles, but the giant fireplace in the center of the castle was virtually invulnerable. Its powerful draft allowed it to maintain the high temperatures necessary for metalworking. Second, the ventilation system of large fireplaces helped combat smoke from enemy siege weapons. Medieval besiegers often used smoke bombs and burning arrows in an attempt to smoke the defenders out of the castle. The powerful draft of the fireplace could suck in this harmful smoke and expel it outside, keeping the air in the castle breathable. Archaeological research shows that many fireplace chimneys had special branches leading to loopholes and firing positions. These channels supplied fresh air to the defenders of the walls and also removed smoke from their own weapons. This allowed archers and crossbowmen to fire accurately for long periods of time without suffering from smoke. The ability of fireplaces to work with different types of fuel was especially important. During a siege, firewood could run out, but giant fireboxes allowed furniture, wooden structures, and even parts of the roof to be burned. The size of the fireplace made it possible to dispose of large wooden elements without prior disassembly, which saved time and energy for those under siege. In some castles, fireplace chimneys were used for secret communication between different parts of the fortress. The system of channels allowed messages and even small objects to be passed from one room to another, bypassing areas controlled by the enemy. This function was especially valuable when parts of the castle were cut off from each other. The psychological impact of a working fireplace on the besieged should not be underestimated either. During a long siege, when the morale of the defenders was low, the burning fire in the main hall reminded them of home, family, and the need to resist. Gatherings by the fireplace helped to maintain discipline and unity among the defenders. Interestingly, in some cases, fireplace chimneys were used to evacuate particularly important people from the besieged castle. Wide channels allowed a person to make their way to the outer wall and get out. Of course, this was extremely dangerous, but in a critical situation, such a retreat could save lives. Finally, fireplaces were used to destroy important documents and valuables in the event of the inevitable fall of the castle. The large firebox allowed archives to be quickly burned so that they would not fall into the hands of the enemy. Many historical documents were lost in this way during wars and sieges. The religious and mystical aspects of giant fireplaces played a role in medieval culture that was no less important than their practical functions. In Christian tradition, fire symbolized divine light, purification, and protection from evil forces. The hearth was considered a sacred place under the special protection of the patron saints of the home. In the Catholic tradition, fire was associated with the Holy Spirit, who descended on the apostles in the form of tongues of fire on the day of Pentecost. Therefore, lighting a fire in the fireplace was often accompanied by prayers and blessings. This was especially solemn in new castles, where the first fire was lit by a bishop or other high-ranking church official. The size of the fireplace had symbolic meaning. It was believed that the larger the fire, the stronger the divine protection extending to all the inhabitants of the castle. A giant fireplace symbolized not only the earthly wealth and power of the Lord, but also his closeness to God and his ability to provide spiritual protection to his subjects. In some regions of Europe, there was a custom of consecrating fireplace stones. The priest sprinkled holy water on each stone of the future fireplace, read prayers over it, and applied special symbols. It was believed that such a consecrated fireplace would never cause a fire, and would protect the house from all misfortunes. Fireplaces played a special role during religious holidays. At Christmas, special Christmas logs were lit in castle fireplaces, huge tree trunks that were supposed to burn throughout the holy night. This custom, known as the Yule log, had both Christian and more ancient pagan roots. During Lent, the fires in the fireplaces were dimmed or extinguished altogether as a sign of repentance and abstinence. On Easter, however, particularly solemn fires were lit, symbolizing the resurrection of Christ and the victory of life over death. The Easter fire in the castle fireplace was often lit from a candle brought from the church after the Easter service. Fireplaces played an important role in domestic religious practices. Family prayers were read here, and home services were held in the absence of a priest. Many noble families had a tradition of evening prayers by the fireplace when the whole family gathered to communicate with God. The fire created a special atmosphere of piety and concentration. There were also superstitions associated with the fireplace fire. It was believed that fire could predict the future. The shape of the flame, the direction of the sparks, and the color of the fire were used to predict upcoming events. If the fire burned evenly and brightly, it portended prosperity. If it smoked or burned poorly, trouble was expected. Some researchers believe that the giant size of fireplaces was associated with ancient pagan traditions of fire worship. In pre-Christian Europe, sacred fires played a central role in religious ceremonies. The adoption of Christianity did not completely destroy these traditions, but adapted them to the new faith. A large fireplace in a castle could be a kind of compromise between ancient customs and Christian orthodoxy. Thus, the religious dimension of giant fireplaces was an integral part of their functional purpose. For medieval people, spiritual needs were no less important than material ones, and the architecture of castles reflected this feature of the worldview of the era. The economic component of maintaining giant fireplaces was enormous and requires separate consideration. The costs of fuel, maintenance, and repair of such structures accounted for a significant part of the budget of even the richest feudal houses. Analysis of surviving documents allows us to understand the scale of these costs and their impact on the economy of medieval estates. First of all, the cost of firewood was enormous. One large fireplace consumed between 10 and 15 cubic meters of wood per day during the winter. Over the course of a year, this amounted to about 4,000 cubic meters, an entire medium-sized forest. Documents from Kenilworth Castle in England for the year 1327 indicate that the wood used to maintain 3 large fireplaces was enough to heat 200 peasant houses. The cost of wood rose steadily due to deforestation. By the 14th century, a real fuel crisis had begun in many regions of Europe. Castle owners were forced to buy firewood hundreds of kilometers from their estates, which increased its cost many times over. Transporting wood by river or land required significant additional expenses. The quality of the firewood was also of fundamental importance. Large fireplaces required specially selected logs, dry, uniform in size, from specific tree species. Oak provided long-lasting heat, but was slow to ignite. Birch ignited quickly, but burned out quickly. Coniferous species produced a lot of smoke and soot. Experienced woodcutters knew which trees to harvest for castle fireplaces and at what time of year. Maintaining fireplaces required a staff of specialists. Large castles employed professional firemen who were responsible for lighting, maintaining, and ensuring the safety of the fires. Their work was quite well paid. A skilled fireman received a salary comparable to that of a minor knight. In addition, Chimney sweeps, locksmiths to repair metal elements, and masons to restore masonry were required. Regular repair and maintenance of fireplace structures cost a lot of money. High temperatures gradually destroyed even the highest quality materials. Refractory masonry had to be renewed every 5 to 7 years. Metal elements, grills, hooks, dampers, wore out even faster. The archives of the French castle of Vincennes contain accounts for the year 1405, which indicate that the repair of a single fireplace cost an amount equal to the annual income of 2 villages. Fire insurance was also included in the expenses. Although there was no formal insurance system as we understand it today, castle owners created special funds to compensate for damage from possible fires. Part of the income from the estates was set aside in case it was necessary to rebuild burned-down buildings. Interestingly, the economic burden of maintaining large fireplaces led to the introduction of special taxes. In some regions of Germany in the 14th century, a fireplace tax was introduced, a special levy on owners of large hearths. The amount of the tax depended on the size of the fireplace and was intended to compensate for damage to the region's forestry. Despite the enormous costs, castle owners continued to build and maintain giant fireplaces. This shows that the economic losses were offset by other benefits: social prestige, political influence, and practical advantages. The fireplace was not just a luxury item, but a necessary tool for managing a feudal estate. The evolution of large fireplace designs reflects the development of medieval technology and the changing needs of castle life. From the primitive hearths of the 11th century to the complex engineering structures of the 15th century, it was a journey of 4 centuries, full of technical discoveries and architectural innovations. The first large fireplaces of the 11th and 12th centuries were simple stone niches in the walls without chimneys. The smoke escaped through holes in the ceiling or windows, making the air in the room practically unbreathable. The size of these hearths was determined not by functional needs, but solely by the desire to demonstrate wealth. The appearance of chimneys in the 13th century was a revolutionary innovation. The first chimneys were simple vertical channels, but they radically changed the situation. It became possible to effectively remove smoke, which made large fireplaces not only a status symbol, but also a practical solution for heating and cooking. The 14th century brought important improvements in the field of draft control. Craftsmen learned to create chimneys with variable cross-sections, which allowed them to regulate the intensity of combustion. The first dampers appeared, metal plates that could partially block the smoke channel. This made it possible to save fuel and more accurately control the temperature in the room. A particular achievement was the invention of multi-channel chimneys. Instead of one large pipe, builders began to create systems of several parallel channels, each of which could operate independently. This made it possible to heat the fireplace partially, using only part of the firebox, which was especially important in the off-season or when saving fuel. The first heat recirculation systems appeared in the 15th century. Smoke channels began to be laid through the walls and floors of the castle, transferring the heat of the flue gases to other rooms. This technology, called hypocaust by analogy with the Roman heating system, significantly increased fuel efficiency. The development of metallurgy led to the appearance of cast iron inserts in fireplace fireboxes. Cast iron plates and grates accumulated and radiated heat better than stone. In addition, they allowed for the creation of more complex shapes of the firebox space, optimized for better combustion. The first cast iron fireplaces appeared in the wealthy castles of France at the end of the 14th century. An important innovation was the introduction of air supply systems for combustion. Craftsmen noticed that combustion improved if air was supplied to the firebox not only through the main opening, but also through special channels from below or from the side. This made it possible to create more efficient designs that required less fuel for the same heat output. Architectural solutions also evolved. Early fireplaces were simple rectangular niches. Later, arched vaults appeared, improving draft and heat distribution. In the 15th century, fireplaces with sloping sidewalls became popular, as they better reflected heat into the room. By the end of the medieval period, the technology for building large fireplaces had reached a high level of perfection. Craftsmen were able to create complex systems that combined heating, ventilation, cooking, and even hot water supply. However, it was during this period that the era of giant fireplaces began to decline. More efficient heating technologies appeared, and changing lifestyles made huge fireboxes less necessary. Regional features of the construction and use of large fireplaces reflected the climatic conditions, available materials, cultural traditions, and architectural schools of various parts of medieval Europe. Each region developed its own unique solutions, adapted to local conditions and needs. In England, fireplaces were particularly massive and simple in form. English craftsmen preferred deep rectangular fireboxes lined with local sandstone. Chimneys were built with thick walls and straight lines, without complex bends. This design was dictated by the island's humid climate. Simple shapes were better able to withstand dampness and provided reliable draft even in foggy weather. French fireplaces, especially in the chateaux of the Loire Valley, were striking in their decorative and elegant lines. French architects were the first to decorate fireplace mantels with stone carvings, coats of arms, and sculptural compositions. The fireboxes were made shallow but very wide, which created a spectacular flame that beautifully illuminated the carved decorations. In German lands, a tradition of tiling fireplaces with tiles developed. German master potters created magnificent painted tiles, which were used to decorate not only the mantelpieces, but also the inner surfaces of the fireboxes. Tiled fireplaces accumulated heat better and released it longer, which was important in a continental climate with sharp temperature changes. Italian fireplaces were distinguished by the use of marble cladding and complex architectural forms. Influenced by ancient heritage, Italian craftsmen created fireplaces with columns, pediments, and other classical elements. A distinctive feature of Italian designs was a sophisticated system of air ducts that allowed several rooms to be heated evenly from a single hearth. In Scandinavia, where winters were particularly harsh, unique heat storage systems were developed. Norwegian and Swedish craftsmen built fireplaces with massive stone structures that heated up during the day and gave off heat at night. Such designs allowed a comfortable temperature to be maintained with minimal fuel consumption. Spanish fireplaces, especially in the northern regions, were characterized by the use of local granite and basalt. These hard rocks allowed for the creation of thin-walled but durable structures. Spanish craftsmen were also the first to use metal smoke collectors, special funnels that improved smoke collection above the firebox. In Eastern European lands, fireplaces were often combined with bath stoves, creating combined heating and hygiene systems. Such designs made it possible not only to heat the room and cook food, but also to provide hot water for washing. This tradition was especially developed in Polish and Hungarian castles. Craftsmen in the mountainous regions of the Alps and Pyrenees came up with interesting solutions. Here, fireplaces were often built into rock formations using natural caves and crevices. Such structures were extremely reliable and durable. and some of them are still in use today. Climatic differences also influenced how fireplaces were used. In northern regions, fireplaces were lit almost all year round, while in Mediterranean countries, they were only used during the winter months. This was reflected in the design of chimneys. Northern chimneys were built for continuous use, while southern chimneys were built for periodic use. Regional differences also affected the social functions of fireplaces. In the democratic city-states of Italy, large fireplaces were often built in public buildings for collective use. In feudal France, they remained a symbol of aristocratic power. In the trading cities of the Hanseatic League, fireplaces served as a place for concluding business agreements. The decline of the tradition of building giant fireplaces began in the 15th century and was due to a complex set of factors: technological, social, economic, and architectural. The era of large fireplaces did not end suddenly, but gradually, as the lifestyle of medieval society changed and new heating technologies appeared. The first reason for the decline was the fuel problem. By the 15th century, forests in densely populated regions of Europe had been significantly depleted. The price of firewood rose so much that maintaining a giant fireplace became an unaffordable luxury even for wealthy feudal lords. In England, for example, the price of fuel increased tenfold over the course of a century, forcing people to look for more economical ways of heating. The development of metallurgy led to the emergence of more efficient heating devices. Cast iron stoves, which appeared at the end of the 14th century, provided much more heat with less fuel consumption. They were more compact, safer, and did not require a complex system of chimneys. Gradually, stoves began to replace traditional fireplaces in castles and palaces. Changes in architecture also contributed to the abandonment of large fireplaces. New construction technologies made it possible to create more spacious rooms with high ceilings, where a giant fireplace would be lost and unable to effectively heat the entire space. In addition, new layout solutions with separate kitchens appeared, which deprived fireplaces of their culinary function. Social changes in the late Middle Ages also played an important role. The feudal system gradually gave way to more centralized forms of government. Castles ceased to be the centers of political life, their role being taken over by royal palaces and city residences. The new nobility preferred comfort and practicality to the traditional display of power. The development of urban culture led to a change in ideas about comfort and coziness. The urban patricians, who became the new elite of society, preferred small, cozy rooms with efficient heating. Giant halls with huge fireplaces seemed archaic and uncomfortable to them. The ideal was not grandeur, but practicality and refinement. The religious changes of the Reformation also influenced the fate of large fireplaces. Protestant movements criticized ostentatious luxury and called for simplicity in everyday life. In many regions that adopted Protestantism, giant fireplaces were seen as a symbol of Catholic extravagance and were condemned. The military revolution of the 16th century finally changed the role of castles. The advent of firearms made traditional fortresses vulnerable, and their defensive function was lost. Castles were transformed into country residences, where comfort and beauty were more important than the ability to withstand a siege. Under the new conditions, giant fireplaces became an unnecessary anachronism. Interestingly, in some regions, the tradition of large fireplaces lasted longer. In remote mountainous areas of Scotland, Ireland, and Scandinavia, giant hearths were built until the 17th century. Here, they retained their original functions. They were used for cooking, heating, and as the center of social life in isolated communities. The last large fireplaces in castles were built during the Gothic revival of the 18th and 19th centuries. However, these were no longer functional structures, but historical stylizations designed to recreate the atmosphere of the Middle Ages. The era of truly gigantic fireplaces is irrevocably gone, leaving behind majestic monuments of medieval engineering. Modern archaeological discoveries continue to reveal the secrets of medieval fireplaces, providing new data on the technologies, functions, and everyday life of castle dwellers. Over the past decades, scientists have revised many established ideas about the purpose and design of giant hearths, relying on precise research methods and an interdisciplinary approach. One of the most significant discoveries was the excavation of Akershus Castle in Norway, conducted between 2005 and 2012. Archaeologists discovered a uniquely preserved 13th-century fireplace system with original metal elements and the remains of cooking utensils. Analysis of the ashes and coals revealed that up to 15 different dishes were cooked simultaneously in one fireplace. Revolutionary results were obtained from research at Bolsover Castle in England. The use of ground-penetrating radar revealed hidden smoke channels that were previously unknown. It turned out that medieval craftsmen had created a complex system of underground air ducts that not only removed smoke, but also supplied fresh air to other rooms in the castle. This discovery forced a rethinking of the level of engineering knowledge of medieval builders. A study of the Château Gaillard Castle in France using 3D laser scanning revealed surprising details about the design of the fireplaces. Scientists discovered that the chimney flues were integrated into the castle's defense system. They could be used to transmit signals between different towers. Light signals sent through the chimneys were visible at a distance of up to 10 kilometers. Research on Conwy Castle in Wales, where archaeologists used paleobotanical analysis, proved particularly important. The study of pollen and seeds in fireplace ashes showed that medieval hearths burned not only wood, but also special aromatic herbs, medicinal plants, and even exotic spices. This discovery confirmed the hypothesis about the ritual and medical use of fireplace fires. Chemical analysis of fireplace deposits at the Carcassonne Castle in France made it possible to reconstruct the medieval diet of the castle's inhabitants. Scientists found traces of dishes made from venison, bear meat, exotic birds, and even whale meat. These data significantly expanded our understanding of the culinary traditions of the medieval nobility. The application of dendrochronological analysis to wooden elements of fireplaces yielded unexpected results. Research has shown that trees aged between 300 and 500 years old were used to build the fireplaces, specially selected for their unique properties. Some oak beams came from trees that grew during the Viking era. An international project to study medieval fireplaces, covering 23 European countries, made it possible to create a unified database of design solutions. A comparative analysis showed that fireplace construction technologies did not spread randomly across Europe, but along specific trade and cultural routes. This discovery shed light on medieval networks for the transfer of knowledge and technology. One of the most intriguing discoveries was the discovery of traces of the use of fireplaces for alchemical experiments at Glastonbury Castle. Analysis of the deposits revealed the presence of rare metals and chemical compounds characteristic of medieval alchemy. This confirmed the hypothesis that some castle fireplaces were used not only for domestic purposes, but also for scientific experiments. Modern technologies continue to reveal new aspects of the use of medieval fireplaces. Infrared spectroscopy, mass spectrometry, digital reconstruction. All these methods help scientists better understand the daily life of medieval society through the prism of its heating systems. The legacy of medieval giant fireplaces for future generations turned out to be much more significant than their creators could have imagined. These architectural structures not only influenced the development of heating technologies, but also left a deep mark on the culture, art, and even psychology of European society. First of all, medieval fireplaces laid the foundations for modern heating technology. The principles of draft control, multi-channel chimneys, and heat recirculation systems, all these solutions, which first appeared in castle fireplaces, became the basis for the development of industrial furnaces and modern heating systems. Engineers of the Industrial Revolution carefully studied medieval designs, borrowing the most successful solutions. The architectural influence of fireplaces can be traced in the layout of European homes to this day. The tradition of placing the main room around the fireplace, characteristic of medieval castles, has been transformed into the layout of modern living rooms. Even in homes with central heating, the fireplace often remains the compositional center of the interior, a symbol of home comfort and family hearth. The cultural heritage of medieval fireplaces is reflected in literature and art. The image of a large fireplace as a place for family gatherings, storytelling, and heartfelt conversations has become one of the enduring motifs of European culture. From medieval chronicles to modern novels, the fireplace remains a symbol of home, security, and human warmth. The psychological effect of open fire on humans, first systematically used in medieval fireplaces, is being studied by modern psychologists. It has been established that contemplating flames reduces stress levels, improves concentration, and promotes creative thinking. Medieval people intuitively used these properties of fire to create spaces for communication and decision-making around fireplaces. Fireplace construction technology has influenced the development of the building industry as a whole. Methods of laying refractory materials, calculating smoke channels, and creating complex multi-level structures, all these skills, honed on fireplaces, were then applied in the construction of industrial facilities, fortifications, and public buildings. The social functions of medieval fireplaces have also left their mark on modern culture. The tradition of family gatherings around the fireplace has transformed into modern forms of home leisure. The concept of the family hearth as the center of home life can be traced directly back to medieval fireplaces, where the entire life of the family was organized around the fire. The environmental lessons of medieval experience are particularly relevant today. The fuel crisis of the late Middle Ages, caused by uncontrolled deforestation to fuel giant fireplaces, was one of the first examples in history of an environmental disaster linked to energy consumption. This historical experience is important for understanding contemporary environmental issues. The restoration and preservation of medieval fireplaces has become an important part of cultural heritage protection. Many castles and palaces in Europe are restoring their historic fireplaces not only as museum exhibits, but also as functioning heating systems. This allows modern people to experience the atmosphere of medieval life and appreciate the craftsmanship of ancient builders. Contemporary architects and interior designers continue to draw inspiration from medieval fireplaces. The principles of creating a cozy space around the fire, the use of natural materials, and the organic combination of functionality and beauty, all these ideas, embodied in castle fireplaces, remain relevant today. Thus, the giant fireplaces of medieval castles have left a legacy to posterity that goes far beyond the history of architecture. They have influenced technology, culture, psychology, and even the ecological consciousness of humanity, proving that truly great achievements of civilization do not become obsolete, but are transformed, continuing to serve people in new forms.